Listen, I'd love to tell you that all art should be judged in a vacuum, irrespective of its influences and contemporaries and context. I'd also love to tell you that Headhunter isn't some stoically comic love child of Resident Evil and Metal Gear Solid. Maybe these statements are broadly true. Art probably is most pure, standing alone in a field of its own making, and Headhunter isn't stoically comic. Maybe it's comically stoic. At the time of release, Headhunter was constantly compared to Metal Gear Solid, apparently the only sci-fi stealth game to ever exist. That also had a fair amount of cutscenes and a conspiracy plot that revolved around the horrifying nature of advancing technology. Okay, maybe they are a bit similar. Jack Wade sort of looks like Solid Snake, except he has a beard. Most reviews I can find from the time mention the beard. What in the world is up with the beard? There must have been some massive hair trimming of 2001 that left the collective maw of the gaming community drooling at the sight of something with hair on its face. Luxurious hair and whiskers, like a masculine bed to sink into. Soft and warm, and was I saying something about Metal Gear? Like the staunch anti-evolutionist frothing at the mouth with a rabidity that I find concerning about how they didn't come from no monkey. I too froth and spit when anyone dares compare Headhunter to Metal Gear Solid, including myself. Because you see, Headhunter did not drink the milk of Kojima's teat. Amuze and Kojima both suckled at the teat of one mother, like the last two pups in a litter, unable to advance into true doghood as soon as their more mature brothers. That grand matriarch is, of course, 80s action cinema, blockbuster bullshit. The kind of cheesy slop that makes Velveeta look like King Midas's piss. We all know that Solid Snake is just a Kurt Russell sperm that gestated a bit too long in the sun and genocided into the father figure of millions of little boys that said no every time their dad asks them to go outside and play catch. No, genocide is not a word. Trust me, this video is about a game, a video game video. I'm just taking stock of the head sitting in the waiting area outside the hospital room where Jack Wade is being birthed, trying to pin down who the father may be. Hunting for a certain head, you may say. I won't say it, but you may.
Hi, I'm Bill Waverly.
And I'm Kate Gloss with All You Want to Know.
We are greeted by an exceptionally entertaining pair of newscasters who convey a frankly frightening set of political and moral mores and set the tone for the game to come, in a sense. The casters sort of serve as combo exposition and comic relief, but they're genuinely funny. We don't get a large sense of the sorts of media the Society and Headhunter consumes en masse, but since the majority of it is news, it paints a picture, at least for us, of a culture where the quote-unquote entertainment is mostly news-cum comedy, satiating multiple consumer desires at once. And of course, the news has corporate owners, with ties to the ever-strengthening law enforcement agency and their new president. We'll see the details of this partnership a bit later on, but for the attentive, it paints a darkly comic portrait of the world we'll be spending our time in. I'd really love to get into the nitty-gritty of what the all you want to know, which also seems to me to dance on the fourth wall like Humpty Dumpty. This is the backstory of the game world, pay attention. Tells us, but I've decided to incorporate it more into the plot of the game as the points are relevant. However, I have separated this intro into a video that you can watch at the link in the description of this video, and I highly recommend you do so. It serves to transition the player to the game's setting pretty well. Headhunter stars Jack Wade, the bearded cop of truth, a man who wakes up in some strange lab-esque lab, assaulted by the hazmated wage slaves that work there, and after a heroic escape, winds up laying in the gutter a mere trot from the door to the street. Headhunter will try to be several things over its runtime, and when you first gain control of Jack in either the tutorial or this prologue lab sequence, what it wants to be is a third-person shooter with some rudimentary cover mechanics. You're sort of worked over a control scheme that feels like it is some hybrid of some of the games I mentioned earlier. Those that shall not be named, Heathen Pagan, or the steak will smell of your flesh tomorrow when the sun rises. You have some stealth crouches and wall hugs, evasive rolls, and a lock-on system that feels a bit sticky, but the good kind mostly, but also just a tad too sticky. If you hold the square button, you can have tank controls too. Wowza. Then this camera, though. This camera is even stickier than the lock-on. Stickier than when you accidentally leave a Jolly Rancher on your seat in the dead middle of summer and it turns into a... Video games. The camera is sometimes a pain in the ass, is what I'm trying to say. It locks behind Jack when you press R1, and that is the primary way you'll be orienting it to see what you want to see, like you're some Nintendo who just got Ocarina of Time for Christmas. It's Z-targeting camera control is what I'm trying to convey to you. Video games. Jack wakes up in a hospital after his 3-day nap, amnesiac of course. His doctor, I think, goes over his chart and notably mentions some sign of advanced surgery. She completely ignores everything he says and just begins his treatment, mental stimulation. The funeral of the Anti-Crime Network's founder was this morning, and our lovable newscasters are covering it here. A couple criminals have changed places on the exchange that tracks their capture or kill value. Jacques has soon spun a yarn about his proficiency in his past as a law enforcement officer for the Anti-Crime Network, or ACN, by one Frank Hawk, his former boss. Jacques has been fired from the ACN for unknown reasons, and if he wants to get back in action, he's going to have to go independent as a headhunter. That's the name of the game! Along with the ACN, one of the other principal powers in the world of Headhunter is a company known as biotech. They have a seeming monopoly on things like specialized weapons, behavior chips that are commonly implanted in criminals to rehabilitate them by controlling their behavior, and soft drinks. X-Must is a disgustingly named beverage that is frequently advertised in the newscaster scenes and on loading screens. In an early segment, we see a small statement from a Dr. Zweiberg, an elderly man who serves as the head of biotech and likely the mind behind a great deal of their techno-biological innovations. Jacques is then hired by a woman named Angela Stern to investigate the murder of her father, Christopher, the aforementioned founder of the ACN. She is positive that it was orchestrated by Don Emilio Fulci, the presumed leader of the criminal syndicate, and a shadow of a man with virtually nothing known about him. At Angela's place, we are clued into some of the history of the ACN and of Christopher Stern's protege, Alan Sharp, who we had seen briefly during the earlier newscast and who is now the head of the ACN after Stern's death. You're maneuvering this Isle of Man around, enjoying some bonding time with Angela, the Stern, being exposited upon somewhat novelly. Excited to finally go get some head when you are granted the big one, to love it or hate it, the motorcycle. How better do you masculinize the manliest dude this side of MGS2? A scant few weeks after GTA 3 made you want to drive everywhere really fast and shoot guys or whatever, Headhunter made you drive fast in order to obtain skill points that are for some reason the primary factor that determines whether or not you can get a new Headhunter license, outside of progressing the plot. Yes, it is cool to shoot this thing around at very fast, rapid high speeds, and the tests that have you blitzing across the city, hitting checkpoints in VR are actually fairly fun as well. There's also one memorable and maybe frustrating portion a bit later that I'll get to. Besides this, the bike is more cause for annoyance than excitement. I don't mind driving to the different story sequences much, but when you need to rack up skill points, the way the bike controls becomes too much of a chore. Part of it is probably me being poor at it, but the bike likes to skirt and jump at any change in speed and sometimes wants to turn like a boat. To get skill points, you need to maintain a speed above a minimum threshold and you'll start racking the points up in a sort of odometer fashion. If you successfully slow down without crashing or bumping traffic, you'll keep the points you racked up, but if you crash, some or all of them will be lost. There's no damage mechanic for the vehicle, so I can understand wanting to impose a penalty on the player for poor driving, but the skill point mechanic ends up just requiring 5 to 10 minutes of grinding points on some of the higher ranks. It isn't difficult to meet the requirement for the next license level playing normally earlier on, but as you get to the higher ranks it becomes more unfeasible unless you're adept at controlling the bike. I pretty much found the longest straightaway where I didn't have to make any turns and weaved back and forth through traffic for a few minutes every time. The motorcycle does go a little ways to making the world seem a bit more real and to fill out time between the missions, but I wish the skill point mechanic was reworked or there was a little bit more optional content to find while riding the bike in order to make its inclusion feel more worthwhile than it ends up feeling as is. The Layla tests are a neat addition and harken back to, forgive me for I've committed the sin of hypocrisy once again, the MGS VR missions somewhat. The different ranks are staggered throughout the main story path of the game, and each rank involves a single test of each of 4 different types that reflect the game's divergent gameplay modes. I already discussed the bike in depth, but there is also pure stealth, pure combat, and a sort of combination gauntlet that is timed. These Layla tests aren't too difficult, and they actually do a decent job of making sure that the player is ready for the next section of story missions, without feeling too much like forced tutorializing. If you're a god like me, you can beat Hank Redwood's times on every test in order to feel like a big man. Hank Redwood, by the way, is Headhunter's rival character, and to be frank, he is boring as shit. There's basically nothing interesting about him, and he exists to look big and masculine-ish, and then be made a joke of by Jacques Wade a few times and then die. Oh yeah, this video is gonna have spoilers, by the way. Anyway, we're formally introduced after a mention on a newscast earlier to the character during this Layla sequence, and Jacques basically just talks shit on him until he goes away.
Never had a girlfriend? Dog walked out on him?
Wait a minute, how did you know?
Call it a lucky guess.
All Hollywood actors recently held an ENP Awareness Day, in which gun enthusiasts got to try out the new Smith & Easton Stimulator Automatic. With enhanced sound effects, recoil, and explosive impact on non-organic targets, the Stimulator promises responsible gun owners all the thrills of a conventional weapon. I certainly keep a stimulator by my bed, Bill.
Absolutely, Kate. And coming up in tonight's lifestyle feature, 2 wheels or 4. With road accidents costing body parts and Grey Wolf's Wolfpack biker gang riding high on the criminal exchange, we ask, does riding a motorcycle make you a bad person?
Much like the real world, we complete the requirements to become a law enforcement officer in just over 10 minutes, and our first action on the job is to track down one Grey Wolf, the leader of the Wolfpack, a somewhat notorious biker gang. All of the notable criminals in Headhunter are ranked on a maybe global but probably national leaderboard and have a respective worth to their capture or death. Dead or Alive is the name of the game here. I thought it was Headhunter. And all the weapons the ACN and the Headhunters use are designed to kill targets by shutting down the nervous system, and these weapons are either majorly or entirely supplied by biotech. The purpose of the nervous system shutdown is to not cause internal organ damage, because you see, the fulcrum the world of Headhunter is balanced on is the human organ trade. This was introduced as early as the beginning newscast, but I wanted to save it until I introduced the world and gameplay a bit more. I'm working under the probably safe assumption that most people watching this video haven't played the game, so forgive my indulgence. There's a somewhat complex backdrop here. The ACN is corporatized but also revered or respected above a police force as we think of it. Everything is corporatized though, so that's probably more to the benefit of the ACN's reputation than not. It is fairly easy for anyone to become a headhunter, and despite the fact that we don't see much of it, we can imagine that the lower Layla ranks are populated mostly by opportunists and dunderheads, hoping to make some easy money and status. The aforementioned criminal leaderboard serves to reinforce this mindset. There's a criminal ranking system and a headhunter ranking system, with both sides revolving around and ending with the collection of human organs. All the criminals shown in the game are in some way involved with the black market organ trade and usually the conspiracy that surrounds said trade. The two sides of the law battle over the same resource, and the more of the other side to kill, the more of that resource they obtain. Yes, this is a dystopia in a sense and will prove itself to be even more so as we go, but my observation in hindsight is how gamey it all is. I don't know if this is really intentional, although MGS 2, which came out very shortly after this mind you, would look at the VR warfare as a game concept more explicitly, but I do wonder if the folks at Amuze ever had this topic cross their minds. I want to spend more time on the world and the organ trade, but let's get some more actual story stuff out of the way first. If I went in-depth on every little note in the game's fairly detailed database, we'd be here for an even longer time. Jacques tracks some of the Wolfpack down at their gas station hideout and finds a couple of informants who were informed upon. The Wolfpack doesn't take betrayal lightly, however. In order to complete this area, you'll have to do some light puzzle solving for the first time, and these puzzles serve to indicate how the rest of the puzzles in the game are going to be. Pick up item to make next item or area available, add more items in the chain, or make the area bigger to extend the amount of time it all takes. It isn't offensive, but it occasionally feels time-wasty in a game that is mostly brisk and willing to keep you moving. I'm not sure if the puzzles were kept simple in order to be mostly obvious and keep the action and stealth the focus, or if Amuze were afraid to have anything too complex in fear of scaring players off. I'm not sure what the right answer is in regard to these puzzles, but their inclusion feels like a vestige of some Resident Evil influence that really doesn't fit the pace of the game too well most of the time, especially here at the beginning. After finding this guy's scorched corpse and this other dude's regular corpse, Jack has a short and contrived encounter with Grey Wolf. Just shoot the fuck. Jack goes to the Wolfpack HQ where he can safely expect to find Grey Wolf. The gas station served as a pretty solid intro to the game's basic mechanics by allowing a few different approaches to stealth or direct combat, and including what amounts to a single puzzle, and the HQ accordingly ramps these concepts up just a bit. The HQ is more cramped, so stealth is a bit more difficult since you can't loop around the patrolling guards as easily. Going head-on is made more difficult as well due to the amount of enemies present that can take you down without too much trouble if they all fire on you simultaneously. The primary puzzle revolves around getting the HQ meeting room open. We are then thrown into a duel with a goon named Bruce, who is maybe the single strongest non-boss entity in this entire game. This guy's no joke. It's just humorous that some of the extremely well-equipped enemies we'll encounter later on are still a bit weaker than good old Bruce. I can dig it. All along the way so far, and continuing until the end of the game, you'll acquire intel that sits waiting to be read in the aforementioned database that serves to inform the characters in-universe where to focus their efforts, but is also decent extra world building if you take a bit of time to read through them and pay attention to the minor connections between them and the plot's events. To reject a cliche, I don't know that this extra fluff amounts to making the Los Angeles and Headhunter feel more alive. The empty streets, the static traffic pathing, the linearity, and the simplistic enemy AI see to preventing that. What it does do is show that the plot of the game and the societal backdrop it takes place in were well thought out. Headhunter is the baby sucking on the teat of sci-fi action cinema, and the milk seems to be nourishing. If I have a grand thesis on the game, this point is a cornerstone of its construction, so stay tuned. On the roof of Wolfpack HQ, Jacques and Greywolf come face to face again, and the player is served the first in a line of unique boss fights the game will throw at you. This one may even be the best of the bunch, as like MGS's Vulcan Raven, the Greywolf fight asks you to use stealth and allows for some creativity with the tools the game has given you so far. Your firearm selection is still fairly limited, but proximity mines and grenades give you a little explosive experimentation ability. Greywolf has a powerful weapon, and even though the game provides a handful of healing items that you could have saved for this fight, direct combat is not really the intention. The arena is simple and Greywolf's behavior isn't anything remarkable or challenging, but the fight is memorable nonetheless. For its use of the primary mechanics, besides driving or whatever, but also for the cutscene that follows, a moment that defines the game is something a bit more thematically brusque than its schlocky demeanor might imply. Greywolf falls off the edge of the roof and, hanging there, asks Jacques to save his life in exchange for some information about the activities of his co-workers, and endearingly says that he isn't going to beg. Jacques saves him, and in their conversation, Greywolf alludes to the fact that he and Jacques aren't so different. Both are just fighting each other in order to pay the bills and make a living. It is an extremely, extremely common trope for a villainous character to attempt to persuade the protagonist by telling them how alike they are and blah blah blah. What works for me here is, first of all, Greywolf is the first real antagonist of the game. It isn't the final boss preaching that two opposing ideologies are actually the same thing, bro. It is a small-time criminal telling a currently small-time law enforcement agent that they're both cogs in the same machine, working towards the same ends. Second of all, there is truth to what he says, although it doesn't become exactly clear how right he is until much later. Greywolf compares the Syndicate, the gigantic criminal conglomerate run by the repeatedly mentioned Don Fulci, to the Teamsters, and gives a bit of info on what Fulci's work entails and where he is now. Big-time international organ trafficking and a cargo ship, the Queen of Hearts, loaded with organs after deaths from a flood in the Caribbean. As a final gesture of goodwill, Greywolf tells Jacques about some supplies in a side room on the opposite side of the roof, and is left for the authorities to pick up. The entire introductory portion of the game really puts its best foot forward, and like many other games, you can tell that a lot of care went into making sure this part of the game stuck the landing. The core gameplay is all on display at some point between Layla and the HQ, and while the plot hasn't gone anywhere too notable yet, the world and the themes that the narrative elements are building up to feel appropriately sci-fi with a pinch of intrigue.
Today's big story: the wolf is caged. Gang leader turned syndicate henchman Greywolf is tonight behind bars, following an ACN operation which left his Wolfpack organization in disarray. Details are unclear, but word is hotshot headhunter Hank Redwood was responsible for the arrest, helming an ACN operation planned over several months. Greywolf himself now faces a long term in the notorious Aquadome underwater prison. Guess that's one wolf who wished he'd worn sheep's clothing, Kate.
Still with biotech, the corporation responded to rumors of a mysterious viral outbreak at the labs, saying it was simply a bad case of flu among technicians researching a cure. A spokesman promised workers full compensation for any organs damaged. Meanwhile, biotech subsidiary BioPop is distributing its Xmas nutrient drink free to schools, hospitals, and aerobic centers as part of its new welfare program. Doctors advise us to keep up those fluids, especially during the flu season.
Next up, some good news for seniors. From today, all over 60s on welfare get a job counting votes in state elections. With guaranteed recounts and generous bonuses for seniors whose count matches government computer predictions, these young at heart poll jockeys could be on to a winner.
It's great to see those guys still active, Bill.
Sure is, Kate. After the break, plucked from the ocean 6 weeks ago, raft boy Pedro Alonso is set to fly home. But with Miami relatives still laying claim to his organs, we ask, is home where the heart is?
After some more briefing and a slightly more difficult Layla upgrade, we are shuffled along to the next big plot sequence, the mall. Another syndicate goon, one Esteban Ramirez, has taken a group of shoppers hostage at the mall, including, of course, Angela Stern. We drive to a new area that is more complicated layout-wise, I guess, but it never really matters, and find out that the situation is essentially at a standstill. Jacques decides that he is going to sneak into the mall and handle the problem himself, not too unreasonable, considering his employer and maybe love interest, I guess. This is an action game, and there's a male and a female character, so they have to get romantic by the end, obviously, is trapped inside. Here we have a nice increase in level and combat complexity compared to the greywolf portion of the game. Jacques approaches through the sewers and up through the parking garage. Here the guard patrols are slightly more complex, and the parking garage is an open area in contrast to the cramped halls of Wolfpack HQ. There's some gas you can light and trigger a car explosion to kill or distract the patrolling guards as well. Once you enter the mall proper, goal numero uno is to find Angela. We have a fairly open central area combined with some tighter hallways and a more maze-like design in general. You search for Angela and then find a rope 2 feet away and get to hear and see Ramirez for the first time while eavesdropping. Now this dude has what I call a character design. Anyway, after a successful sabotage job, Ramirez flees to the real point of the entire operation, the bank. An unfortunately placed security unit puts the mall as the #1 job to run to make a digital bank heist possible. Jacques escapes the way he came, but now with ACN agents patrolling instead of terrorists, and we already have the actual law enforcement as enemies by this point in the game. You're discouraged from harming them, but it's just important to note, I think. At the bank, Jacques confronts Ramirez through a sheet of glass, like every customer service worker in the year of our Lord 2020.
Hold it.
Bank's closed, ass hunter.
We have some unfinished business.
And we are treated to the most bizarre, unique, cool, annoying, and shitty boss fight in the entire game, Safety Door. Ramirez has these exploding robot acid spiders that drop in from the vents or something, and then you shoot them with your electric gun and then hijack them to jump at the glass a handful of times to destroy it. Except the spider pathfinding is butt, even though the room is tiny, and the controls when you hijack the spiders are also butt and just feel weird, and I don't really understand what makes the spiders blow up after different numbers of jumps. I'm probably just bad, but this fight took me probably 3 times as long as it needed to, and even when I played this game as a kid. This is one of the moments that stand out in my mind as being almost frustrating, but not really hard, but memorably annoying. That kind of fight, you know the one, everyone has one. We have nearly stopped Ramirez's scheme. The scheme being, siphon money from all the accounts in the bank's network and funnel them into the syndicate's account for use in what are surely illicit activities. Jacques hits an indignant Ramirez with the truth serum he acquired back at the Wolfpack HQ, and gets all kinds of juicy details about the syndicate and Fulci, and also that Ramirez and his sister were probably a little too close, if you catch my drift, youngster. But before he asks too many questions, he forces Ramirez to open the bank's final locked door, and Angela helps Jacques to reverse the money transfer, and donate a small amount to all of the bank's customers. How sweet. We have to play this short memorization minigame to do it, but I'm all for stealing money from illegal organ traffickers, even though it goes to citizens who will pay taxes that will go to legal organ traffickers. We get some leads from the drugged Ramirez, including a tip that points us back to the Wolfpack HQ. In order to get info on the other leads, though, we yet again get to upgrade our Layla license. These are staggered out a bit weirdly to me, but I'll get into that a bit more once we enter the later areas of the game. We get a call from Frank telling us that the ACN is now after us for a series of charges, the most egregious being reckless endangerment of organs. We apparently took someone out at the mall that was an ACN agent, and now every headhunter in the city will be after us. We never see any besides Hank. Still, we better hurry and upgrade our license. I don't see how Jack should be able to upgrade his license when he is currently a wanted man. You'd think the ACN would put a block on his license and just send someone over as soon as he even walked in the building, but I digress. Placing the call from Frank right after the test would solve that issue. If you're anything like me, it is now time to grind up some skill points. Yay. After that, another Layla test, nothing too remarkable. We get some more gizmos and weapons to put to use. The little miscellaneous crap you get through the game usually just serves no function besides sitting in your inventory until its obvious use becomes obvious and you use it. The weapons I'll talk a bit more about in detail later on. Is there an echo in here? After Layla, it is back to the HQ for a retread of the area we did right before last, pretty much. This whole section feels a little odd to me. It doesn't seem rushed or out of laziness considering the reuse works well enough, with a bit of new stuff to do. The brevity helps as well. I don't think the devs threw it in at the last minute because they needed another area, but it just feels like a weird spot in the pace of the game to revisit the first real dungeon, if you will. We were just here. I get the feeling maybe the intention was to slide back here nearer to the end of the game for some plot insight before the ending, as a way to bookend the plot in a sense. It wouldn't surprise me if we lost an area in development and the Wolfpack HQ revisit had to be moved to this point in the story, but that's pure speculation. Anyway, making shit up based on gut feelings aside, here we are launched into a series of plot events and story beats. Jack finds a map that indicates the location of several triggers for a bomb or bombs. Then, after Frank calls to warn Jack about the price on his head again, Don Fulci interrupts the lovely newscasters to threaten the city with a nuclear detonation. It is already planted, and because of the botched bank job, Fulci is demanding that every Jack and Jill in LA donate money to the syndicate and refill their account, or he will go all Truman on their ass. So they do.
This just in. ACN agents have discovered the nuclear bomb and verified it is capable of leveling the city and vaporizing all living things for 70 square miles. However, they assure us the bomb will soon be defused and there's no cause for alarm.
Oh, well, that's good to know, Bill. So, big night in the city. How's the weather shaping up?
Jack decides to go alone and deactivate all the bomb's triggers without telling Frank or anyone else, so that he has some bargaining power with Alan Sharp at the ACN. I mentioned that the motorcycle is only ever used for one actual gameplay section outside of Layla and getting skill points, and here we have finally reached that section. Finally in quotation marks. This section is a little bit infamous for being a timed mission that requires at the very least not awful motorcycle driving, some small combat sections, and some short input copying minigames to disable each of the triggers. The time limit is the real kicker here. It extends for each successful diffusion that you perform, but complaints about it being too tight are prevalent. I felt the same going into this playthrough. Even though I hadn't played the game in years, I recalled having a bit of trouble with it every single time I had ever ran through the game. It was disappointingly easy this time. In retrospect, most of the challenge probably came from the minimap being unclear as to how you have to get into some of the nooks and crannies that the triggers are tucked into. It isn't always just point the minimap marker at the target and go. Besides that, the entire thing is a breeze if you don't dick around. I still don't like the section all that much, but when you aren't banging your head against the wall trying to get to where the detonators are stashed away with the minimalist minimap guiding you, the entire thing doesn't feel too egregious. Hank Redwood creeps up after Jack disables the final detonator and knocks him out. Jack is taken into custody and immediately sent to prison, while Hank takes the credit for disarming the nuclear device. Alan talks a bit of shit to Angela, and the newscasters give us some exposition on where Jack will be spending the rest of his days. The Aquadome, an underwater prison where the inmates are pitted against each other in gladiatorial combat. It's broadcast on TV for the public's enjoyment, and the losers' organs get donated into the system.
Gladiator Games, exclusively on ABCBS.
Sounds exciting, Bill, especially with Jack Wade himself top of the bill.
You said it, Kate. Former bounty hunter up against demented criminals. This one could be a real grudge match.
Good news is the public's the winner. Losers' organs going for transplant.
That's right. I'll bet there's a few people would like one of Jack Wade's organs inside them, eh, Kate?
How lovely. Headhunter is trying to steal my heart. Greywolf and Jack have met up again down here under the sea, more amicably than one would probably expect. Greywolf gets one-shotted by this specimen and Jack steps up for a third boss fight. This one is pretty unique as well. Not that dear old Headhunter is anything like Metal Gear Solid, lest I start myself foaming at the mouth again. But they both tend to have each boss fight be unique and pretty much incomparable to the other bosses in the game. This one requires you to trigger these electric traps shortly before leading Gladiator over them. It isn't the most exciting fight in the world, but it is the only fight in the game based on movement alone. Jack's gun is worthless here except on the ragtag goons that run in for some reason. And after this short and easy fight, we are done in the Aquadome. Yeah, if you're anything like me, this game is a bit of a shock. I was expecting to have to sneak out of a suitably more complex than the mall prison, without all the extra cool weapons and miscellanea that we had acquired from our Layla rank, but no. Sleeping gas gets pumped into the arena after Jack's victory to subdue him, and armed guards come in to take him back to his cell. Greywolf in a gas mask appears and easily takes out the guards. He gives Jack an extra mask, and after a short jaunt up some big ladder,
what a thrill.
They arrive at these pod things that enable them to escape to the surface with no issue. There's a part of the game that feels rushed or half-baked. It is probably this entire Aquadome sequence. It just feels so off to me. I like the fact that Greywolf and Jack are basically unlikely friends now. It's thinly written like most of the character work in the game, but it feels good. And there's something telling that a bottom-level crime boss and an independent headhunter with essentially no political power stand united against the ACN, Alan Sharp, and Don Fulci. Or rather than stand united, they don't sell each other's corpses off for organs. It is more that the gameplay, the sneaking, the levels feel missing for this entire portion. The next few areas, the last in the game, are suitably large, open, complicated, and gameplay focused enough to feel perfectly placed in the pace of the game's complexity curve. The Aquadome would be a perfect spot story-wise to have a middle ground location. Maybe sneaking around the prison a bit to collect some items to allow Jacques and Greywolf to hatch their escape plan during the combat broadcast. If you've played Dead to Rights, a similarly silly action game released in the same generation, you could compare this idea to the prison sequence near the beginning of that game, or at the least a shootout section similar to the game's opening while the characters make their way to the pod. I'm not sure, this is speculation again, and I don't even like to be speculative about these kinds of things without more evidence, but this part feels like it was written to have more gameplay and a bit of bonding time with Greywolf. I would guess that the gameplay the rest of the game has wouldn't be able to handle the necessary NPC/enemy behavior for my suggestions to be a possibility. At no point in the game is there any time with any NPCs that move around or have actual AI that don't just attempt to patrol and or kill the player. They rarely even exist and they just stand around interacting with something in front of them. Basically, nothing in the game indicates that a prison section would be possible, assuming there would need to be non-hostile guards and prisoners moving around or at least not killing Jacques on sight. There is also no point in the game that the player is teamed up with any kind of ally character, and besides some potential with Angela later on, this Greywolf escape is the only part of the story that would require it. It likely would have been more work than it would have been worth to implement an AI companion version of Greywolf for a short escape sequence. Despite these considerations, this middle chunk of the game just feels a bit undercooked to me. The Mall is a great level with a lot of energy and intensity, and everything between then and the Queen of Hearts is a bit underwhelming. There aren't any new levels or areas, a short reuse of the first area with no boss, a motorcycle sequence, and a boss. It feels like the plot is moving towards its final act, or at least half by this point, but the gameplay can't keep up. Well, all of the best levels and bosses besides Greywolf are still coming up soon, so don't get too discouraged. So our two plucky anti-heroes surface and just so happen to be a stone's throw away from the Queen of Hearts. Don Fulci's organ boat, if you recall. Convenient. Greywolf and Jacques' escape is explained to the public as them being sent off for their criminal rehabilitation. If this is the standard for any time any trouble gets going at the Aquadome, then the reported 100% success rate for response for riots, etc. starts to make more sense. If you act up, we'll get your organs anyway. Alan comes over to talk more shit to Angela about Jacques and claim he is close to catching her father's killer. Angela continues to essentially tell him to piss off. Jacques calls and lets Angela know that he's headed to the Queen of Hearts, which is coming to one of the city's ports. And then his transmission cuts out. So Angela Stern suits up in some tight leather and heads over to the docks to board the ship herself. We get a small scene of some goons complaining about their job and remarking how the only difference between working for the Syndicate and working legit are things like the hours and the wage. More testimony that Greywolf wasn't just bullshitting us way back when. We now take control of Angela for the first time, and her gameplay is essentially the same as Jacques, except for starting with an empty inventory and access to only one weapon, a silenced handgun. The docks is the largest area yet, with little spots to scavenge a couple items here and there. The guard patrols are a little spread out, but they can be tough to sneak up on in the open spaces that take up the majority of the area. The last spot under a tower by the fence to the ship in particular was one of the most tricky parts to stealth through in the game. I'm not actually sure how much of the sporadicness of the guard's movement in this spot and other places throughout the game is deterministic versus randomized. It feels mostly like the result of rigid patrol patterns for each guard that are desynced from each other, and also they can walk into each other and sort of push each other around. It's a bit goofy in action, but so is a lot of the game. It's probably easier to pistol snipe these guys than to try to stealth kill them. Angela stowaways in a shipping container and gets placed on board the Queen of Hearts. And to follow up the most open area in the game yet, we get the most complexly put together tight corridor section in the game yet. Not that you'll be scratching your head to remember how to maneuver these halls or anything. We are trying to find Jacques first and foremost. A bit of casual exploration in Syndicate slaughter will lead us to a cell containing Jacques and an open cell next door to his with a weak wall. Further exploration will lead us to some kind of a device that mixes chemicals and creates explosive packages. Convenient. Alright, we just need to find some chemicals to combine and create an explosive to free Jacques. They are scattered around, requiring a bit of exploration to nab. While looking for chemicals, we also come to the bridge, and Angela is able to secure a copy of the original broadcasts Fulci has been making, and then sending from the ship. Taking the chemicals back to the device and doing a short color-matching minigame, we have our explosive. Going back down to Jacques' cell and planting the explosive leads to a cutscene where he is freed. He says that he and Greywolf were overwhelmed by Fulci's guys when they attempted to board the ship, and Jacques isn't sure where he was taken. Angela passes along some paperwork on a relationship between Biotech and the ACN. She then heads back up to work on decoding the encrypted Fulci recordings to hopefully discern his identity. Jack heads below to find Greywolf and perhaps also the Don himself. We are back in Jack, and on the lower decks we find some more advanced tech and security than up above. These rooms are well designed and combine some of the best aspects of the docks and the upper decks in terms of level design. There are heavily equipped ACN goons and biotech logos on some of the equipment down here. Jack interrogates a guy and learns that biotech has been buying black market organs from the syndicate to introduce into the legal organ trade. The ACN seemingly acts as a go-between and armed guard for any biotech activity. Also something about a weird man experiment. I doubt that will be of any consequence. It's here that the big penny drops, although it wasn't exactly subtly foreshadowed as much as it was pinned to the game's intro in flashing neon. But it confirms what I've been hinting at. The Syndicate, Don Fulci, Biotech, Dr. Zweiberg, the ACN, Alan Sharp. Like George Carlin said,
"It's a big club, and you ain't in it."
And the Machination's headmaster, Don Fulci. Jack makes his way to the deck of the ship and finds a kingpin-looking fella whose legs apparently cannot support his own girth. Jack presumes him to be Fulci, which makes him laugh. Of course the Don wouldn't actually be on this ship. This human thumb is just another Syndicate goon. An ACN chopper rises in the sky, and as baby Kingpin waves to it, it turns him into a human pencil. Swooping down close to Jack above some minigun rig, our old friend, Mr. Lister Sister Fister, makes his reappearance. Or Esteban Ramirez, whatever his name was. The Spider Dude. Fantastic. We are treated... I keep writing that. In response to this assured feeling that I had put at least 4 "we are treateds" into the script, I went back to check. And I've actually only put it once before, when describing the first Ramirez boss fight, Spider Bomb Bank Job. So really not only am I not the hack that I thought I was at the beginning of this sentence, but my subconscious is so much smarter and gooder and tastier at writing than I am that I applied this idiomatic turn of phrase to the 2 fights in the game that involve this weirdly uncomfortable character. Uncomfortable, I think, because of his slapdash does-nothing for anyone character design, and also he is the only non-white character in the game, and I'm not sure if he is some kind of stereotype or not, although I don't think he is. And also he is just not pleasant in that way career criminals often aren't, I imagine, but not fictional career criminals. Tony Soprano Montana types who are assholes but also sorta cool but real-life career criminals. Guys who obsess over robot acid spider bombs and wear tank tops with spiders on them like they were hoping to be hired as some ramshackle Hispanic Spider-Man, but Miles Morales showed up first so he had to toss in with the Syndicate. Because unfortunately the ACN doesn't have an acid bomb spider division. God, you love spiders, and the Syndicate is taking what they can get. All you have to do is run the bank mall job switcheroo and also not talk about the incest thing. And also maybe later kill Jack Wade with a minigun light rig setup. And unfortunately Ramirez failed on all 3 accounts. Punishment, death. We are treated to a fight with fan-favorite Esteban Ramirez on some minigun light rig setup. It's the only fight in the game that has some degree of challenge to it. The optimal strategy being to blow the lights out with grenades or gunfire first, then bob and dodge stray grenades while whittling Ramirez's health down. His death is ungraceful, but so is his life. Jack and Angela flee in the Aquadome pod and we see a new newscast. The Fat Man was pinned as Fulci in order to publicly kill the figure off. Who did Angela find out that guy really was anyway? Alan is the Don. The most robustly written reveal in gaming history, probably, or something. Yeah, it was immediately obvious and would have been more surprising if Sharp were more of a bureaucratic creep and nuisance than the actual big bad man. But it does reinforce the theme. 2 puppets or more, a single puppet master. When it comes to organs, Alan keeps his legal and illegal scalpel sharp. Let's keep going. In completely unrelated news, Biotech is benevolently distributing their drinks to third world and developing countries at no charge. Wow, it's almost dystopian. Except real companies actually do it. Nestle, you vultures, you know who I'm talking about. Back at Casa de Stern, Angela and Jack express even less surprise than I at the reveal of Fulci's true identity. Jack explains the obvious benefits of having control over both the ACN and the Syndicate, and Angela and Jack awkwardly flirt in order to make their contrived eventual action movie romance seem less contrived. Frank calls Jack and wants to disclose the dirty laundry of the ACN, although I doubt there's anything he knows that we already don't. The meeting place is oddly chosen as the Biotech Labs, which Jack will need a AA license to access. Angela wants to go, but Jack tells her to stay behind for some reason. Narratively, this beat is thinner than a Girl Scout cookie, but it just reminds me of the Aquadome spiel I went off on earlier with regards to the gameplay. Amuze probably couldn't or didn't want to incorporate friendly NPC characters during actual stealth and combat sequences, so they didn't. Angela will make a crucial appearance soon after our arrival at Biotech, though, rest assured.
You sound like a damn media break.
In a related story, Biopop stepped up shipments of its nutritional Xmas drink to victims of the Caribbean flood, promising a survivor's six-pack for all. The move is part of Biotech Corporation's expanding humanitarian program, which now sees Xmas distributed free throughout the Third World and developing countries. A spokesman expressed Biotech's determination to be a force for good in the world, pointing to top scientist Ernst Zweiberg's nominations for the ABCBS Science Personality of the Year Award and a Nobel Prize. Bill?
Staying overseas, and a diplomatic incident was narrowly avoided during the First Lady's visit to the newly unified Korea, when her gift of medical-grade organs was unexpectedly served as an entree at the evening state banquet. The First Lady declined to eat the dish, but avoided offending her hosts by claiming to be vegetarian.
And coming up in our lifestyle feature, with organic foods still finding their way onto the black market, we ask, how can we be sure the food we eat has no natural ingredients? That's after the break.
Bike grind gang, rise up. The descending sun decorates the scene for the drive to the final batch of VR tomfoolery. Another round of Layla tests leaves us with more firepower and some sick new body armor, and we head off to Biotech as the dark sets in. Get the notebook out. We're going to be funneled through a lot of plot stuff at rapid pace, and I'm going to try to keep it all clear and understandable for people who have never played the game before. The main gate is locked. We head off to go through a sewer tunnel and up into the Biotech property proper, but we encounter Hank Hardwood, slamming a can of X-Must on our way. He wants to force a confrontation that has been obliquely danced around the entire game, or more properly, these guys haven't liked each other the 2 times they interacted previously, and now they must duel, cowboy style, outside the saloon of Biotech, in the dusty western streets of sewer rat funk and other assorted odors. Not that long ago, Hank was being falsely propped up as a heroic headhunter for the ACN, while Jacques was cast as a criminal and sent to the silliest underwater prison this side of Impel Down. Both headhunters on the streets in the public eye, they're cast as opposites when they are technically the same thing. Only below, in the sewers, can their confrontation as men with a distaste for each other happen honestly. That confrontation takes the form of this out-of-place and frankly distasteful QuickTime event. James Rolfe talk yells, "What were they thinking?" as I die on this thing like 4 times in a row. It's so out of nowhere and requires a relatively dexterous set of button presses that I can't help but feel that this wasn't the original plan for this fight, although that is purely speculation again. Regardless, this attempt is misguided or just annoying, although funnily enough it reflects Hank as a character. I gave him a thematic fluffing in the last paragraph like he's some games as literature rival figure worthy of such a treatment, but the truth is that his character is just flaccid no matter how you look at it. Not that we are dealing with a broadly full-blooded cast in Headhunter, but it is unfortunate that the supposed rival character who could theoretically serve as a strong foil to the near-flawless Jack Wade mostly just feels limp as he gets beaten. Creeping into the nicely manicured and cobbled Biotech exterior courtyard, we are struck with some deja vu. The hazmated wage slaves from way back when have made a return. Disposing of them and entering, Frank calls us and tells us to meet him on B1, and make sure to use our thermal goggles to detect lasers. Why in the hell are we meeting here again? A statue of Eve hangs over the luxurious decorum of Biotech's lobby. A couple of backroom kills nabs us a reception key. I am a sucker for the sort of contrast this game gives in its levels. The first area we explored was a dingy old gas station, and now we are in a Resident Evil-esque, frothing begins, lab mansion chimera. Triggering an alarm brings 2 guards and an elevator up to investigate, and we are able to descend into the belly of the beast below. These lasers are annoying. Oh, and we have a rocket launcher now. Time for me to talk about video game guns. Video game guns are cool stuff. Top tier Kino firepower. The sort of bloodbringers you'd like to use on some unequivocally evil cartoon demons or robo-Nazis. Unfortunately, the smattering of weapons and assorted explosives we have access to in Headhunter is mostly basic and ununique. I do like the way they are staggered out by license level to allow a feeling of character progression over the course of the game, but their actual performance and uses are just underwhelming. Pistol has unlimited ammo, fair enough, and you can easily get through the whole game using nothing else, Angela Stern style, especially if you maintain a stealth approach to every area. The shotgun is suitably powerful with abysmal range. The machine gun's DPS is pretty crazy, but it requires more precise firing and bursts to really be useful, and the rocket launcher is a good kill all 3 of those guys standing together weapon. The Neurostunner is a neat concept. I like the idea that you can play non-lethally, but you actually can't since the ammo is so limited, and breaking the necks of enemies is a more effective way to stealthily clear out an area, which you can do to the ACN agents in a couple areas that you aren't allowed to use any weapon on besides the Neurostunner. And if you do use the neurostunner, the guys will wake up after a fairly short period of time. So just break their necks, pacifist style. There are abundant grenades and the occasional proximity mine. The grenades are sporadically useful for taking out a group, but the mines seem basically pointless. You can force yourself to set up a situation where they would work, but they are hardly ever efficient or worthwhile. The other element to the setup, Resi style, is the limited ammo supply for each weapon type, besides the pistol, obviously. The shotgun gets saved for up-close confrontations where you need to avoid as much damage as possible, and the machine gun gets used for... I don't know, really. It's fine to whip out here and there, but the ammo is so limited that it isn't useful for overmuch besides the final boss. Health is limited, and so are these adrenaline items that give you the equivalent of extra health that drains over time. But the truth is that the game is mostly just really easy, and no area or confrontation is complex enough to warrant too much strategizing at all. New Game Plus cycles to increase the difficulty, but maybe some more options could help. Truth is, though, that Headhunter struts around with some similar clothes as some of its stealth horror and action contemporaries, but the size is wrong. Or they were actually made by Indonesian sweatshop workers who are also fingerless children. The components are there, but the game is rigged. I'm playing checkers with chess pieces. Not that my intent is to cast the entire game's interactive portions as a net negative equation, especially at this point in the video, but I don't know if I've made some of these larger issues clear. But we'll speak more on this once we reach the point of the exercise. So, we enter the atrium that the game's first cutscene began in, a circular bed/operating table in the center that Jacques woke up on and escaped from. From the upper deck of that very same expansive room, Ernst Zweiberg's elegantly decorated office sits, lined with books, fine art pieces hiding code puzzles and decorative key sets, secret compartments in his desk, secret bookshelf passages. Down the stairs we find the almost infinite ammo box. It doesn't give rockets, but everything else is freely passed along. Of course, this shreds whatever scrap of resource management the game ever had, but it was so little as to not really matter regardless, so shrug. A memo on Zweiberg's desk reinforces what we already knew. The Biotech ACN Syndicate Triforce was working extremely well for pretty much all parties involved. Behind the Serpent Key door, we find a large meeting room with an enormous screen and Alan Sharp holding dear old Frank Hawk at gunpoint. It was a trap, surprising no one besides Frank himself, I guess. Sharp kills him and shit talks about how cool killing people is. If Alan Sharp being Don Fulci is enough of a shock to some hypothetical players to count as a twist, then the actual twist is dropped now. Jack killed Angela's father. A brutal, green-tinted silent film with an ending close-up on the face of the assailant reveals as much. Sharp rides over with smoke coming from his brain in an abnormally painful death for the game, revealed to be shot by Angela, who of course followed Jack. It is uncomfortable to think about how many victims of these new kinds of blood-free firearms may have died similarly. Angela is prepared to kill Jack for his actions despite their history when Zweiberg finally appears in the flesh, old and shriveled behind Angela. To summarize, Jack is a mind control chip that allowed Zweiberg and Sharp to control his actions and therefore get close and assassinate Stern, since Jack and Stern were fairly close. After Jack escaped in the game's intro, the chip malfunctioned. The escape also caused Jack's amnesia. The function of the operation was to capture some of Jack's more ruthless qualities for a project Zweiberg is working on. He incapacitates both Angela and Jack. Jack wakes up in the bed from the intro and Zweiberg gives most of the details of his plan to Jack and gives Jack an X-Mus to drink. Zweiberg is obviously German and probably was a Nazi scientist. Although it is vague, maybe he was just inspired by the Nazi scientists. He has cancer and his wife is dead, and he sees the world as corrupt and the human race is unable or simply unworthy of being saved. He has been using his monopoly on the organ trade and biotechnology to work on the genome of and a living prototype for a master race that will inhabit the Earth after he dies. The prototype is, of course, called Adam. He has also been developing a way to kill off all of the regular human beings so that the new race can harvest all of the biomass in order to fuel their rapid and complex evolution. A virus called Bloody Mary that decimates the internal organs. Part of what spurs the evolution on is the genetic data from several human figures, mainly Jack, the aforementioned ruthlessness, and Zweiberg's intelligence and his will, somehow. You didn't think this game was going to end with some German master race bullshit when this video started, did you? Here we are, strapped to the table, forced to drink the X-Must of art analysis. Stay tuned for the commercials.
Relax, Mr. Wade. But remember, too much TV can damage your health.
Angela wakes up on a gurney next to the prepared corpse of Alan. I'm not really sure why she is alive, but I'm happy to play as her again. We are in a branch of a four-pronged area with these laser light thingies that trigger an alert. You can scrounge around a bit here and need to grab some saline from genetic research, but to move on you need to do something a bit odd that I'm not sure is hinted at particularly well in the game. Throw grenades at or use mines on the security console in the center circle section of the room a couple times to disable the lasers and grant access to the atrium. Angela finds Jacques feeling not too hot. He is infected with Bloody Mary now. The Xmas carries the dormant virus, and the Xmas commercial Zweiberg forced him to watch acted as the trigger. Adam is immune to pathogens, so Angela decides against Jacques' wishes to go get a sample from him in order to hopefully reverse engineer some sort of antidote. Heading to Zweiberg's office and unlocking the desk shows an infrared view of the Eve statue from the reception room ceiling with a symbol-based password on it. Using this password on one of the 2 locked safes behind paintings in the office gives us the half-circle Eve key that unlocks the path to where Adam is being kept at. When Angela arrives, Zweiberg attempts to stop her and she pushes him down and he falls on the control pad in this really sad and pathetic way that I kind of like, which wakes Adam up. He is buff, naked, penisless, and about 8 to 9 feet tall at least. To beat him here, you have to activate the gas flow to the pipes in the room, stun him as he approaches you with gunfire, then shoot the pipes to hit him with the gas. It appears to be extremely cold, but I'm not sure. The fight can be tense, but is actually a little boring because there's no progression of change of any kind. If Adam had gotten faster or used multiple forms of attack, it would have helped some. Getting a sample of Adam's DNA, we head to genetic research once again to make the vaccine, and we head back to give it to Jacques. Jacques will recover quickly after the vaccine is administered, and we cut to Zweiberg injecting nanites into Adam's neck. These will apparently heal him long enough for him to kill Jacques and Angela, and as he grabs some nearby Master Race custom armor and weaponry, Zweiberg crawls over to the nearby computer console. He triggers the mass activation sequence and the self-destruct function to the base because of course he does. Jacques and Angela decide to attempt to stop the broadcast. Jacques will head down below and Angela will stay here and try to divert the signal the base is sending up to the world satellites. We are jacked in one more time and we need to make our way to where we fought Adam as Angela to reroute the uplink the base is sending up. We can't go through the door we used as Angela in the infinite ammo box room, so we'll have to open up the other painting in Zweiberg's office. The code for the safe is found by wearing the night vision goggles in the meeting room in the center of the desk. Once we have the token from the safe, we can head in the large double door opposite of where we first entered the atrium. This elevator sequence is the penultimate enemy combat challenge in the game, with lots of dangerous enemies firing on you at once with barrels to shoot, and a Jacques Wade with a full stock of ammo to burn through. It isn't much of a challenge though. It's easy to avoid fire, snipe enemies and explosive barrels as soon as they appear before they have any chance of seeing you. You can even just sort of run little spirals or whatever and dodge most of the fire with little to no trouble. Although I guess that is a skill in and of itself. Looks at the gladiator boss fight sideways. It is a memorable enough moment regardless, so it doesn't really bother me. You run off to the side here into this freezer room thing that is reminiscent of a certain room in a certain game with a certain boss that a certain someone mentioned earlier in the script, certainly. This room is actually the final stealth challenge, in quotes, of the game. In quotes because this room is like mall tier baby stuff. Sucking a binky and burping up Gerber's type beat. Worthless, honestly. You activate a crane mechanism and head back the way you came. This is the last combat challenge of the game. Maneuvering through a wide, twisted hallway behind a too-fast shipping crate with goons coming out of doors on both sides with the ability to take chunks out of your health. I think it is possible to fight your way through relatively slowly and take less damage, but I find it easier to sprint through, using the crate as cover as much as possible. This calls back again to the game's opening, and I like its placement here as one last hurrah for the combat system of Headhunter, although none of the hurrahs, not even this one, were particularly triumphant. More on that in a bit. At the end of it all, we enter back into the Adam boss room, where Adam is, of course, gone. Zweiberg's corpse remains, and Jacques heads over to the terminal to finish the uplink. He isn't able to stop the self-destruct sequence, however, so he and Angela just decide to get the hell out. We head back the way Angela originally came down, killing a couple guards in the hall area, and when we leave Zweiberg's office, a cutscene begins. The smell of that final boss bloodlust is strong. As Jacques and Angela try to leave, Adam ascends, looking fresh? Doofy? I'm not sure what the word is. He's all flesh and cyber steel. Big gun, too. Definitely can imagine a master race of these guys strutting around the ruins of LA like super mutants, shooting museums and stadiums with that cannon they're lugging around. I call it big dick energy, but they would seemingly all be dickless action figure men, so it's like groin greatness. Penis joke. He one-shots Angela, presumably because she iced him earlier, and focuses his attention on Jacques. Adam is the final boss. We started off on some small-time gangbusting, and now we end by fighting this Umbrella Corp reject. This sick song plays, while he stands in the center of the atrium area and cycles between his two attacks, a blue shot that is targeted directly at Jacques and this red laser that sweeps around. Movement is a more effective avoidance strategy for both attacks than trying to use the destructible cover around the arena. Keep near the damage field around his position and run away from the laser and it should never hit you. To push him in the next phase, you just have to get his health low enough. You have infinite ammo at first with the crate, but eventually it will get destroyed. Not that it matters much, as his health is a fair bit lower than it'd have to be for you to run out of ammo on multiple weapons. Once he gets low enough, his armor falls away and all the cover is destroyed, but the strategy doesn't change. After all his health is gone, we enter the last phase. Adam will stagger towards you and your weapons will be nearly useless. He is adapting to the neuro-weaponry, bro. All you need to do is lurm to the opposite end of the arena as his dropped weapon and shoot him some. When he enters a long stagger animation, run back to the phallic substitute and pick it up. You just need to fire off one shot before he reaches you to win. Finally, the greatest head of all, hunted. Thank God they didn't name Jack Cain and Adam Abel or some winky bullshit. Biblical metaphors make a story deep and complex, brother man, trust me. Jack and Angela escape before the base finally self-destructs and then share the most awkward and unappealing kiss in video game history in the foreground of the explosion. Romantic? Pedantic. I'm shrugging off romance conceptually, platonically, for good now. Thanks, Amuze, you've cast my dreams into a deep pool of X-must, carbonated and popping, sugary, to disintegrate like a rat into sparse protons and cloudy electrons, eventually.
Hi, I'm Bill Waverly.
And I'm Kate Gloss with All You Need to Know.
The news is on again, honey. It seems biotech has exploded due to an accident. Sharp resigned too, I wonder why. Thank the Heavenly Father above that the governor got those headhunters to go out and do their jobs. We'll have plenty of that good old con bat to eat frozen lasagna to now, won't we, darling? They're investigating that syndicate ship that sunk last week, too. It's broadcasting some signal or somewhat. And to get all the illegal organs out. Betty is finally going to be able to get that new heart she's been eating ever since her husband tripped and slipped and shot himself 3 times in the back with his neuro-stun revolver. He always left banana peels and revolvers all over the house, so really it was inevitable, darling, don't you think? Oh, that commercial's on again. Credits. Alright, that's the end of the game. Guess I've said all I have to say. Goodbye, farewell, somewhere over the rainbow. I'm just jerking your chain. My grand thesis is yet to be revealed. The umbilical cord yet to be cut in that hospital room. Many possible parents outside in the waiting room eager to claim paternity. Earlier this very year, the year of our Lord 2020, a university hospital in Cologne, Germany was evacuated while a team disabled an old World War II explosive nearby that had the potential to go off. Zweiberg, like an old World War II explosive, bode his time while also underhandedly. Was it underhanded? And capitalistically taking control of both sides of modern LA's entire power structure and economy. He distributed delicious soda pop, all for the benefit of creating and propagating a master race that 1, looks dumb as shit, just not aesthetic at all really, and 2, will wipe the shit-stained rubble of humanity from the earth with big guns and in big armor, marching boldly across this newly undefiled earth. Zweiberg's wish is theirs, and then recreate Germany or something, I bet. This isn't interesting. It's generic, actually, and all shoveled into the last level of the game and really just doesn't add to the story or the cool world that the game sets up and toys around with. Although, neither does the game. What was I saying about a grand thesis? Headhunter for the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2 by Amuze feels like an 80s science fiction action movie. Blockbuster bullshit, the kind of... No, wait, I already used that line. You know, fucking Die Hard and Escape from New York and the edited version of Blade Runner and Terminator and maybe Predator, kinda. Think about Terminator by James Cameron and other assorted folks, too, although it is a cinematic movie film, so all the credit must go to the director. Hideo Kojima nods precariously, hanging over a cliff of his own making, not a single solitary soul in sight. He'll die all alone, Death Stranding. I still haven't played that game yet, and I'll get to it soon, maybe. It is about running away from a big scary Austrian robot. It is also about the dangerous militaristic and industrial march of technology from some base in an irradiated desert to your apartment complex through time, through space, to try to kill you with machine men. That's not what your dad thinks Terminator is about, though, I would hazard a guess. Maybe your dad is smarter than me. I'm not particularly smart. I just have a predilection towards overthought, and I spend most of my free time consuming, what a word nowadays, huh? Consuming varieties of art and then spending 3 months writing about the single least interesting game I played during that entire time period. Your dad is irrelevant. Headhunter is Terminator by James Cameron. Headhunter is kinda Predator. Headhunter is scared of the tearing away of the rights of human beings because they broke a law. Headhunter loses sleep over the fact that we may be slipping into what looks like a transhumanist paradise. Robotic dick and robotic pussy, no Viagra anymore. But that paradise is like a palm-treed lake far on the irradiated desert's horizons. Mirage. It's not even transhumanist, really. The only post-humanity inside is Adam. Not even a robotic dick for that poor bastard. And all he wants to do is watch your organs liquefy and then reinvent the arch or figure out the earth isn't flat again or go back to the moon and put a big cockless flag on it. Headhunter doesn't care for neuro-destabilization weapons or brain chips or virus-laden sodas or the police being hog-tied to the bad evil criminal guys who are actually just flip-flopped good virtuous lawmen like a horseshoe. Crowd boos. Just ask Greywolf what he thinks about the Syndicate and the Teamsters and Don Fulci and the ACN. Greywolf might have a wife at home. Headhunter's architecture is woefully underdrawn, its scaffolding waterlogged. Too waterlogged to support the weight of thematically obese concrete. Headhunter is about the shoddy romance between generic action hero A and generic action heroine B, as consistently not unfun as it all is, and it is about the battle to prove independence and law enforcement purity or some even more vague equivalent idea or concept. Solving a murder and stopping Don Fulci one and the same goal, presumably. The game doesn't end with those things. By the time Sharp dies, the narrative seems happy to tear the entire system, propping this artificial cat and mouse game up, down. I'm happy to see it go, myself. Too real. Headhunter is a AA early 2000s action game that wears a lot of its influences on its sleeve, although maybe more on accident than out of homage. The controls are a bit stiff and the weapons are a bit bland. The level design is not bad and the voice acting is acceptable. The boss battles are kinda cool and the plot is okay. The driving mechanics are pretty alright and the minigame mechanics are pretty boring. This game isn't underrated. This game definitely isn't overrated. It's rated. Maybe a re-release on Steam or GOG could help it live on in a more deserving manner, but it is rated. Nobody is alive who cares about this game the same way I do, and I don't even care about it more than the people who really love it. Those people may have grown up with a game and love it dearly, but are well adjusted and have a normal life and stop posting about this thing on GameFAQs well into 2005 maybe. 4 years is not a bad amount of time to have people making posts about your game. But Headhunter is also interesting. More interesting than Red Dead Redemption 2 or Skyrim 2 or Fortnite 2 or whatever games people write these stupid YouTube essays about. This video has been a thick description. Thick description is not just your horny furry fanfic.net account's main poetical prose tendency. Thick description is an anthropological concept introduced by Gilbert Ryle and expounded upon and rediscovered by Clifford Geertz that I'm co-opting to talk about video games. Thick description refers to the notion of factually and meticulously detailing social or cultural trends as they relate to a certain topic in order to potentially extrapolate those ideas to other societies or cultures. I tricked you into being thick described, a game you have probably never heard of, didn't care to hear of, haven't played, and still don't care to play. Why? Is it a form of masturbation? Look, I can exercise cool sci-fi concepts out of a game that sold so few copies it makes Beautiful Joe look like Grand Theft Auto 5. Speaking of Grand Theft Auto 5, this game has driving in it. Just like Grand Theft Auto. It has stealth. Wow, just like Metal Gear Solid. Shooting. Stealth. Siphon filter. Flirts with horror, simplistic puzzles, and item management. It's Resident Evil, baby. Nothing more and nothing less. Oh, science fiction? Techno-dystopia? Terminator by James Cameron incoming, son. Fucking hell. The frothing is starting, I think. Why? Does Headhunter have something to teach us about society? One where policing is more unchecked than checked and every criminal they encounter is nothing but another resource to throw into the sarlacc pit of the market? About art? A Jackson Pollock with not enough new and tasty colors and splotches to make the average person see it and buy a copy? To be fair, this box art is a bit shit. Why? Shouldn't I exalt the games I like the very mostest so that everyone can hear about how good and awesome they are and understand how impeccable the things that I like are? And if you also like them, then you are more like me and our parasocial handbinds grow stronger, again and again into forever? Apparently not. Why don't we talk about games that are just alright more? Not every game you have ever played or ever will play can be the greatest, coolest game that you have ever played. Headhunter is not the greatest, coolest game ever for most of us. Headhunter is just alright. Headhunter stands on the backs of a lot of giants and does some neat stuff, but it probably won't change your life or your mindset on games. I just don't think it needs to. You may not ever think about it again after reading or watching this. That isn't what bothers me. Why not? We are in a time when bloated money printing games publishers want to sell you the thing you bought a year or two ago like it is something not only completely different, but also world-changing and or life-affirming. Spoiler alert, it probably isn't. But the point of this video isn't rose-tinted modern games and the modern games industry are badism. I am of the maybe controversial opinion, I don't know if it's controversial, that we are living in the best time to like and play video games since the hobby has existed. We have the entire history of the medium at our fingertips to explore and poke and prod at and take and think and hopefully write about. I don't care about the new Assassin's Creed guy's muscled arm veins one molecule as much as I care about Jack Wade's plain gray t-shirt. Jack Wade stood on the rooftops of the great Metal Gearian Terminatorial pantheons and still no one took a look at his beard or his t-shirt. No one has ever heard of this fucking dude. This guy has a game, and it is different than any other game I've played. The gameplay and characters, exist. They won't excite you much, I'm sure, but these newscasts, this shit is badass. It's funny. It actually makes me laugh occasionally. Funny. The bosses. They're all distinct and unique, and each one is a tiny nugget of unreplicatable fun that isn't found anywhere else in the entire game. No one has played this thing. I have to get on here and detail it for an hour and then justify detailing it, otherwise the entire exercise seems turgidly overwritten and useless and pointless and stupid. I go feral when you call this game a Metal Gear clone or a Resi ripoff. And it isn't because you are even wrong. It's because art is most pure standing alone in a field of its own making. And yes, all art is theft, but Headhunter's newspaper collage should be allowed to be held up and pointed to. I like this one. What can I learn from this? What makes this tick? There's certainly more cool pieces of art that I will never hear of than I will hear of. This fills me with a rage against the dying of the light sort of emotion, every moment of every day. No, actually, really, all the time. I want to foster anyone who consumes anything I make to rush forward with a zeal to experience cool and good things. Tell me about them, tell whoever about them. But share the experiences that you are afraid of letting be lost to time. Headhunter looked more than a decade into the past for its inspiration. Has any creative, games maker or no been inspired by Headhunter? Would they be if they knew it existed? Maybe not. But how can we know unless we know? You know?